Self-Esteem and Resilience by Colton Law, Self and Society under Dr. Yvonne Tai, Summer 2019. Introduction. What does self-esteem have to do with resilience? And why is it so important? Self-esteem is the knowing of one's own worth, and the study reveals its fruit. Resilience is the bouncing back after being knocked down in life. Self-esteem and resilience are shown to be strongly correlated. The importance of bouncing back in life gives to the importance of the study. Depression and suicide are unacceptable. Therefore, society will benefit knowing variables that contribute to resilience. We can institute measures and programs to aid in resilience. Literature review. Hope, worldview, and self-esteem make up the positive cognitive triad. Grover, Diodonato, Kirkhart, and Maida studied this in 2019. They conducted an online survey of 198 participants, and the survey indicated that the positive cognitive triad positively correlated with resilience. The authors sought to clear up the relationship between resilience and well-being, and the triad did mediate. According to Kapakairan and Akum Kapakairan in 2016, more self-esteem correlates with more resilience, and both correlate with less depression. A scale was used on 494 students, and it was thought by the authors that self-esteem would mediate for resilience and depression. It turned out that self-esteem was more correlated with depression than even resilience and optimism. Depression directly influences suicidality, and this was studied by Choi, Shin, Hong, Kim, Kang, Jiong, Park, and Lee in 2019. It was important to the authors to solve youth suicide. Self-esteem was examined via structured survey on 268 students, and the conclusion, self-esteem must be considered and incorporated into interventions for suicide. Costa and Gomez in 2018 administered a scale to 101 battered women as well 108 non-battered women to determine the severity of violence or the lack thereof. Depression and anxiety were also measured by a scale. In correlation to mental health and the aftermath of violence, self-esteem is understudied. Using another scale, self-esteem was measured, and it was determined depression and anxiety have negative significant correlations with self-esteem. Social and personal success even are also correlated with self-esteem. This study was done by Aiken and Radford in 2018. The authors of the study interviewed high school students to determine, does self-esteem development need to be instituted in our educational systems? The research methods of the study. Surveys are popular among the social sciences for their ease of use regarding the administration to the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time. In evaluating self-esteem, the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale is a 10-item survey scored as a Likert scale from strongly agree to disagree, agree, or strongly agree. In my study, the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale yielded an internal reliability of Cronbach's alpha 0.85. The brief resilience scale is a 6-item survey used to evaluate individuals' resilience. It is measured as a Likert scale as well, ranging from strongly disagree to neutral to agree or to strongly agree. And it yielded an internal reliability of Chromebox Alpha 0.84. These two surveys had high internal reliability, and on the 13 participants, the survey included positive and negative worded questions so that the participants were not being led in any certain direction or momentum. But it is possible that some of these wordings were difficult for readers to comprehend. For example, Rosenberg's self-esteem scale, question number 8. I wish I could have more respect for myself. This question was worded in an unfamiliar way to me, considering that to wish more respect is hard to determine whether that is a positive or a negative remark. As well, I noticed that in the brief resilience scale, question number 5 reads as follows: I usually come through difficult times with little trouble. The phrase little trouble was hard for me to determine if little trouble was positive or negative in its connotation. I thought this might throw some of the participants off, and in my study I did notice that those two questions, the scores for those two questions were slightly different than what the participants were scoring on other questions. Prior to the study, self-esteem was predicted to positively correlate with resilience. Self-esteem and resilience have a strong positive correlation. These are the findings. The correlation between self-esteem and resilience was 0.76, which is considered strong. 13 participants scored a mean of 21.615 on the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, answering questions such as, I feel that I have a number of good qualities, and a mean of 3.872 was scored on the brief resilience scale, with questions like, I tend to bounce back quickly after hard times. There's a positive trend in the data, as you can see below. As self-esteem rises, so does resilience. Discussion. I cannot go without referencing De La Matar and Colette in 2019. They discussed attitudes in their book. Attitudes are predisposed responses or reactions to objects. In the case of the study, the object is the self. The way that we interact with ourselves can predict our outcomes. Overall, the existing literature in my study brings self-esteem to the forefront of answers for depression and mental instability versus stability. What may be researched further in the future is demographic effects on resilience. Adjusting the data for things such as but not limited to, age, sex, race, and class, would produce a more accurate representation of the correlation between self-esteem and resilience. The surveys also need to be administered separately to avoid mixing up instructions. In my study, 2 participants' surveys were discarded due to mistaking the 4-point Likert scale for the 5-point Likert scale, and vice versa. Conclusion: our attitudes can help shape and transform our lives. There was a video during the course by Crum that discussed how an attitude really can change and transform your life and the outcome. Self-esteem aids in the bouncing back from life's knockdowns. And again, self-esteem is knowing one's worth. That is, resilience is characterized more strongly in those with self-esteem, more strongly in those that know and hold on to their worth.